So in putting on something corruptible, the personality and the body is corruptible, it can be diseased. But it's diseased according to the patterns of what created it. So because what we live in life, as far as a story, our diseases, our emotions, of what we live, that has to come back to the spherical pattern and be understood. And it's understood according to its own pattern of how everything relates. So in understanding and diagnosing disease, all we have to do is understand these 12 archetypes and how they relate, realizing they relate in an infinite number of ways. But all we have to do is break it down into 12 archetypes and seeing how they're relating and talking to create disease. You said the metal is the boundary of the seed, but that
Yeah.
boundary can leak.
Yes.
So that is part of disease. When you talk with mystics and they have practices of protecting yourself against influences from the outside, the practice is to surround yourself with an egg pattern or a circle or a 5-pointed star or a 6-pointed star. You create a pattern of light around you, and that protects you.
Yes.
Why is that important? Because this is air. This is Libra. This is Aquarius. The setting up of boundaries. But we live within an egg, and we have to have that boundary. There's other things that are more advanced that eventually I think we'll get into that require a boundary so that life can take place within it. It's essential to have that boundary, that structure. So I think you read in the book that you need metal to form the seed.
Yes.
It's that boundary. It's that space. You need a space to hold something in.
Yes.
And that structure will allow you to do certain things. The seed depends on the structure and the boundaries of like the lung meridian, large intestine meridian, the sign of Libra, the sign of Aquarius. Those signs are important for establishing the boundaries, the structure within which life can develop.
Okay, but why it has been said the pathogen of wind comes from the seed element? Why do you say the pathogen of wind comes from the seed?
That's in the chapter on climates.
I guess I don't remember the chapter name, but I have taken down the point here.
Let me see. I'm going to share my screen with you.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to go into the book.
Okay.
Climatic factors, page 37. Okay, so heaviness and lightness. I want to bring up here. So the heaviest element is earth. The lightest element is seed. It's a presence. It's a strong presence which moves. While the fingers are working, the palm quietly coordinates the movement of the fingers. So you don't really, when the fingers are working and you're touching things and you're writing, you don't really notice that the palm is coordinating the movements of the fingers. It's sort of unseen, but it's there doing its job of coordinating everything together. And the seed is sort of, it's a function which doesn't really have presence in the sense of an object that we can define. It's a presence like spirit that is very light. So it's the lightest element. And it develops from water. Even water is heavier than seed. But through water, this presence can enter and flow. And then after seed comes wood. And wood is that flourishing forth of that blood that is developed in seed. And that blood, as it develops, builds tissue so that you get to the earth. But in a disease, you may find that as the seed is not able to contain itself, as the blood flows, the lightness of the seed leaks out and flows with the blood. And then we get wind. In acupuncture, they call it wind, right?
Yes.
And it's just the seed is not being contained. The energy of the seed, the lightness, that presence is not being contained. It's leaking out and floating. So the person begins to feel a sense of lightheadedness and a sense of being dizzy. And it's because the structure is not being contained. And that potential inside begins to just expand beyond what we would consider balanced. So the object is to contain it again. So if we see wind in the element wood, what we really need to do is go down and look at metal, its complement, down here on the other side of the sixth element. We need to go down here to metal. We need to make that metal strong. And that metal will then contain the seed energy and control its leakage.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, yes, I understand. It's clear for me now.
And if you look at five element theory and you look at wind, basically what they say in five element theory is as the liver flows, if the liver is overflowing, it creates wind. But that doesn't make sense because the liver's nature is to flow. It wants to
Yes.
flow. It loves to flow. So where does that dizziness come from? All it comes from is the seed energy leaking into it. And five element theory can't see that
Yes, it's not
because
there.
because they have the pericardium and the Sanjiao meridians in the fire element, and you won't. So its place in relation to wood, those meridians of Sanjiao and pericardium, their place in relation to the wood element are not properly placed, so you're not going to understand that. So they just say the liver is creating wind. In which case it is, the liver is carrying a wind, but it's not the liver's problem. The liver may be strong. And it's just the energy of the seed which is being carried by it. Because the wood, after you have the lightest element in seed, wood begins to create heaviness. Seed is ethereal, like etheric energy, like the template, the perfect template with which we create a body. And then you develop this blood, which is a substance which has weight. But the nature of blood is still somewhat light because it's carrying that nature of seed, but it's taking that seed and bringing it down into a substance which can nourish the body, build the body. And then fire comes along, takes that blood essence that now has that potential that it can reach. Fire can get into that blood, get the energy out of it, and use it to build earth. And then once you get the earth, you have solid, heavy substance. It's just different states of substance. That's all elements are, different states of substance, acting in certain different unique ways. You can take the earth element and just change its nature and it will become a metal, it'll become air. You can take water, heat it up, and it'll become air. You can freeze it, it'll become earth, ice, that hard substance. It's just substance taking on different expressions. But when you start rising and understanding seed element, you have to understand that substance is creating a different unique expression at that level. And once you understand what that seed element is, you got it. And how, in its function of coordinating. Let's go back to that original question of how do you diagnose a disease using this pattern? Well, you have to understand the symbols. The first thing you do is understand the symbols. What do they mean? How do they relate? And then you begin to understand the language. It becomes a language of using this pattern that now that I have this pattern, when I hear astrology, I understand astrology. When I hear acupuncture, now I understand acupuncture. When I see disease, now I understand disease because I know the language that's creating it, that's creating its experience. And that is what we're dealing with here, is the most central part of our being, which is light in structure, creating our lives.